All right, this week we're going to go over the lower leg. So what we have here is the images from last week. Just to start out, I'm going to fill in some of what's missing. So we still have, or we do have here our leg, the weight-bearing side, and then in the Zoom Q&A, we filled in some of the other side here. But I'm just going to put on the hip and a few other things, and we're going to do the supporting leg and then the hips, and then we'll come back and kind of get the muscles of the lower leg. So first, just as a review and getting us back into the whole context of the leg, the shapes we're looking at here from the side, we would see this tensor fascia. That's the big hip muscle that comes over and then will tie into that iliotibial band. So that's this teardrop shape or upside down ice cream cone. Behind that and on the side of the pelvis, so here's that wrapping line, is the Gluteus Medius. We describe that as a pizza and kind of almost standing right on top of the great trochanter, which is what this shape is, hard bony area. And do the same thing on this side. So what we'd want to do here, I think, is get the kind of structure of the leg. And I'm going to make this more boxy, so there's my front. So this is all the front plane, and then we put on some of these muscles, I believe, in the Q&A. So let's leave the adductor there, and that's the hamstring, and then the sartorius too. We could why don't we just leave this one empty or plain? That way you can see the front. That's where the rectus would go. So this top one right over here. And otherwise, maybe it'll just serve to be a process reminder that this was my start. And that way you can see how some of the other things are building up on it. The hip muscles on this, so the tensor on this side would go out to the outside. So it's kind of pushing away, and then it's going to the outside of the leg or thigh. So that'd be doing this. So that's what this one would look like on that angle. And then this would be our pizza, the glute medius. Always on the middle of the pelvis. Sartorius comes this way, and then this is that opening or that fossa that's really important for starting the quadriceps. So that's that one we made over here. And then here's the triangle shape that it gives us. So that's all done. Let's take a look at the back. So back, we need our maximus. And one way we could do that is just get a big shape. So see this big egg. A big egg that comes down across the leg. So this is going to hide and cover over your hamstrings. And this kind of blends in also to the iliotibial tract. So I'm aiming to get this near halfway down the leg. And it's going to cover all this. So the hip is really like the shoulder of your leg. It hides quite a bit. And if I want to get the medius, I'm just going to go over the sacrum and then drop a curve down to the top of the hip, the great trochanter, which is right here. Just going to square that off so it's a little bit more apparent. I would try, as far as the gesture is concerned, to show these as being more stretched, just because the leg isn't pulled out nearly as much as it is on the other side. Okay, so that'll be done, and then again, just as a reminder, all of this, the quadricep that we drew last week, your adductor, so much of this is hidden under the hip structure, especially all the attachment points. So like this was the vastus medialis, this was the sartorius, going down to the tibia, this was the opening in the hamstring, for your two tendons going to tibia and fibula. And then on this side, let's do the same. Sometimes if you want to, you can use, instead of one big egg, you can use two. So like one egg here, and this might help you kind of work through the gesture a bit more. And then if you like using a second egg, I would start it right at the bottom of the box, which you can kind of see right here. and that would be stretching with this leg, because this leg is pulled out and away. So they kind of line up the shape in the same way, but here I'm going to give it more of an S curve. And I'm not adding structural fat yet, so we're going to have it try to resemble more so just the muscle shape. And then when it's completed its wrap, it's going to come out and over to the iliotibial tract, or the wrench shape. So that this is a big S curve. It wraps with the muscle under, and then just kind of blends in with that. You can divide the shape up the same way from the top of the sacrum to find that Gluteus Medius. From here, go forward, up over. Do the same thing when it ends, when you get to the front side of that. And then we could have a little bit of that tensor here coming down. And then that would just be also kind of fusing into the big track. That track is over the vastus lateralis. And so we always get a bit of a half tone or a pinch there because of how much it influences that shape under. So just be careful that you don't see more than what's there. Sometimes people, because this feels split up, think that this is one muscle and then this is one muscle. And it's not. It's just that it looks like two separate things because this track pinches it in a way that causes it to feel separate. So that's what's happening there. And then hamstrings are also going to be underneath the, I think of the shoulder of the maximus. Okay, just clean up some of this side view. So side view, same thing. Maybe here you could use the 2-egg idea, or a cashew shape would be good. And so cashew shape meaning kind of getting the shape of the maximus going 2 directions. And then that's going to go here into the wrench. So I'm just kind of ending that line where I would imagine the track to be. I don't see the sacrum, but I can kind of guess where it would be. So I'm going to make my hip this way. Go across. This is my pizza shape for the gluteus medius. And then back down. And that's grabbing your great trochanter, so just the beginning of the femur. This is the little space where you would get your upside down ice cream cone, which is the tensor fascia. And then this also blends into that track. What we talked about last week, so vastus lateralis is this one, rectus femoris is this one. Maybe you would see a little bit of the sartorius going to the other side, so that would be overlapping there to the inside of the body. Hamstrings are straighter, so that's your bicep, essentially, of the leg. And then that one is more or less done. So that gives us some context, just the ideas that we've covered in other lectures and how they would all look in this one. So let's go ahead and take a look at the lower leg. This will be a little bit easier just because we've done a lot of the hard work of the heavy lifting, but we are going to keep it to the same workflow. So in the lower leg, you can see 3 shapes. So let's say lower leg. If I want to learn an area, remember I need 3 shapes or 3 muscle shapes. That's really it. One of them is going to be the calves. Another is I'm going to put a uniform shape on the front of the leg that are your extensors. So these are, by the way, flexors. They also just kind of constantly hold a tension in your the back of your leg and heel. And then I'm going to show something that is basically a transition into the foot, which is a tendon ramp. It's another shape that I use. It happens here not to be muscle in the same way that other shapes have been. So let's go in order. Let's start with our calves and then work down to the ramp, the tendon. So from the back is the easiest place to see the calves. what kind of landmarks will I need for the calves? Well, you need our fibula. You need to have your kind of H, which is the end of the hamstrings, and then this is the crease over the back of the leg. You need to be able to identify the placement of the ankle. So we have our inside to outside. Remember, if you have a hard time placing the ankle, you could divide this into thirds. So it's usually medial ankle is the first one, lateral is the second, and then the remaining space is your foot. That's one way you could break that up. What's really important for this muscle is that I'm able to find the heel block. So this would be your calcaneus bone, which is just your heel, the big bone that sticks out the back. So the ankle is grabbing onto the structure of the tarsus, which is the bones in your foot. And so this side would be the tibia, this side is the fibula, but we're going to get a lot of that covered from the back. Okay, so let's start with just one big shape. So let's make this an egg. Your calves are just a big egg shape. And I'm going to just start, or kind of feed it into that little space, even if it's just a bit of an overlap, and then bring it down about 2/3. So something like that. I think this is a challenging area because the perspective is so narrow that it's hard a lot of the times to get something that looks good with like a box or a cylinder. So sometimes I just create the shapes and then overlap them to get perspective. Okay, so that is the calves. Now, if we were to see the foot in a different position, like here the foot is raising, so the heel's picked up off the ground, that means that this is working. So part of the job for this muscle is that it's ending with a tendon. Excuse me. Here's a common tendon. This could be one of our shapes. So we have 1, 2, and then I'm going to divide the inside. So this is your Achilles tendon. And you guys know Achilles, a warrior that was almost invulnerable because he was dipped into a magic river by someone and they held him here. So by holding him at that tendon, they had their fingers covering it and it didn't get covered by the water like the rest of his body. So this is a weak point. So it's a really important area. Stories are just a way to reconcile things that maybe we do or don't understand, explain them. You also see this cut in horror movies. So monsters always try to get this. And they're both kind of similar in the sense that they're explaining a real vulnerable part of our body. But if this is ruptured in any way, we can't walk. So to help the Achilles quality, if you want, you could make, you could give this even more of maybe a warrior type design by giving it a bit of like a sword shape. So maybe if you want a better iconic shape to remember by way of creating a muscle, give this a little sword shape so that it feels like it's connecting to the muscle above. Now going back to what I was saying, that's the part. Now you know the position. To be clear, it connects the back of the calcaneus, or the top of the calcaneus, and then the muscle attaches a couple areas. One of the muscles in your calves attaches at the fibula, and then the other one attaches to the back of your knee. And that's why this little window or space is so important, is that it has to get through that to the femur. So part of position also is gesture. So this would be more of a stretch shape. But like I was saying over here, if the ankle lifts up, this muscle is going to squash. So we're thinking, right, that these are the same basic size. It's just that in this scenario over here, the muscle has flexed, and as a consequence of flexing by attaching to the knee and to the ankle, it's been able to pull this ankle up a little bit, or I'm sorry, the heel up a little bit higher. So now this is kind of up off the ground. So crucial to how we walk or just how we stay upright. So this is squashing, getting more of a C curve. This is a bit more relaxed in terms of an elongated shape or perhaps an S-curve. The last is the perspective, and part of that we can find by looking at the parts inside. So for both of these we have two, the shape and then the dagger or the knife. But there's one more shape in your calf. So let's give it a color. And do the same thing on the other side, so we have something identified there. So the calf is two muscles, one on top of the other. So from the fibula, I'm going to draw this kind of as if it's see-through. We have one muscle that goes in a diagonal across the body called your soleus. And this one's oftentimes harder to see from the back because it's a little bit smaller. So your soleus is like this. It might also end up being a little bit lower, but it attaches under the tendon. So that sword that you created, it goes on the underside. But without the other muscle that's there, this one would never attach. So now let's color that back in up here. Now this one that I'm trying to draw right now, this one is called your Gastrocnemius. And it's flexor. And that one attaches to the back of your femur. And in order to do so, it has to get to the femur by way of this opening. So that kind of hollow or pocket that you can feel behind your knee or between your hamstrings is an important one because that's where this muscle ends. And it could be seen to have kind of a separation if you do a real close study. If I draw on this one, just pretending that some of these muscles aren't there. It has two little fingers at the top. One of each, or on each side, is grabbing onto the back of the femur. Remember, we described the femur as kind of like this bow tie or spool shape. And then these kind of wrap onto each side, and that's how it will latch onto that bone. So this here again being the flex side. So in terms of the shapes that I'm seeing, so we have gastrocnemius now, that's one. That's this more prominent shape that has the split or it looks like a triangle at the bottom, and that's the muscle that creates the tendon, or that the tendon would be connected to. The soleus is just a bit harder to see, but it would in this case be under or in front of the gastrocnemius. So that would be kind of not as visible here. Those are the three, and those are going to be most of your lower leg from most views, right? Because again, this is like talked about the discrepancy in width from the front of the leg, the upper leg and back of the leg. And we described that the front of the leg is wider. Well, the lower leg, the back of the lower leg is wider. This is a bigger muscle group than anything that's on the front. So even when you're dealing with the front of the leg, the contour or the width of that leg is still the back. I know that's kind of a head or a screw for most people, but it's a really helpful idea to keep in mind so that you don't overdo the legs. But that would be done, right? That would be a completed leg drawing from the back, and notice how we've maintained rhythm and asymmetry all the way down. Right? That idea of gesture is present even in all of the muscles. So this here, right, so one thing to keep in mind is that even your calf is high to low. So this muscle itself is higher on the outside, lower on the inside, and then that's offset with your ankle, because your inside ankle is higher on the inside, lower on the outside. Okay, let's put this in another view. Let's do this same shape, but from the front. And we're going to work with, leave this here so that you can still see it. And I'm going to build it up a little bit more slowly. So we're going to use this orange color, which is representing the soleus. Soleus starts from here, right? So it's on the back, so I'm not going to cover the bone. And it would start like this. So it's going to go down. Nothing really covers the tibia too much. So this as a plane, kind of that gray area, is mostly vacant. And then the soleus is going to be continuing over here. And from the front view, it looks to me more triangular. So you can even put in like a little triangle if that helps you remember it. But do notice that it's offset. So that's soleus. Then gastrocnemius, remember that goes higher. So that's going behind the knee. This one starts much lower. So this here is going to be the larger calf that's on top. This is the one again that's making the Achilles tendon. So that's going to be going down here this way. And then we get the fibula kind of starting back up here. See that bone with a little bit more prominence. So in this view, you could start, like I started with the separate shapes, just so you could see a different perspective on how the muscles build. But what I would recommend when you're doing your homework or working with this area is just to treat it as one uniform shape, just like I did here. So just this single shape is the best way to try to use this muscle most of the time. Commonly, we would see the gastrocnemius on this side, but I think because it's turned away, it just doesn't have the same, we don't have as good a view of it. So there's our calf. The other shape that we're going to have in here is extensor tendons. And when I draw those, so now they're kind of looking at this one. So let's say that the calf is, this is just one shape. Now the extensor tendons, let's make like a yellow or green yellow. So you have a big egg that kind of sits off the side of your tibia and attaches down at an angle without really ever covering the shaft of the tibia. And this gives us a couple shapes. So it gives us one here, and I just would caution everyone to be really careful when adding this, because you can all feel your shin. And you know that it's a plane that doesn't have a lot of mass to it. It's mostly just a sharp plane. And sometimes when I see people adding these shapes specifically, they tend to get really, really built. And so it kind of looks like the front of someone's leg is exploding. But what I'm trying to get you to see here is that this is a muscle group that sits, over the bone. So this is the bone. And then behind that bone of the tibia is the calf. In this kind of broadening, because everything here is still thin to thick, front to back, is what we have on our lower leg. Again, the calves is flexing. These muscles, so this is a group. I'm summarizing this as a group. They're extensors. So this, they run the gamut from muscles that would maintain the arch of your foot, extend your toes, extend your big toe or smaller toes. But it's a good introductory shape to start to get familiar with the mechanics of the lower leg and foot. So that would be our second shape. So we have one for the calf, two for the extensor, and then because I don't want anyone isolating a muscle to a part, I want you to make a ramp from the bottom of this one that just goes down and into the foot. And I'm going to draw it here as like an arrow. And this is why the front of your ankle, or the transition from the front of your leg into your foot, is curved and fluid. It's because all of these tendons from the extensors get cinched down by what's called a retinaculum, which is like a bracelet for or an anklet in this case. And so they hold kind of all of these tendons down, and so it creates this smooth curvature that just then flows out into your toes. And that would be done. So how can I double check? Well, I would come up and say, are all the things that I made on the leg and the back consistent here? And the answer is yeah. So if I do the abductors, they're higher as a curve to the adductors. Adductors are higher as a curve to the quadriceps, down, sartorius, to the calf, outside to the inside, and then heel. So every muscle is in some kind of asymmetrical relationship to the next, just like our gestures from the very first week. And that's why we did the gestures in the first week, is so you would be sensitized to the way anatomy actually works. This is a massive, massive secret to kind of developing consistent feeling of realism, regardless of if it's photorealism or just a realism in character design for cartoons, is just this understanding and use of asymmetry. So that one's done. We have our 1, 2, 3 shapes. Now since we've done the front, the back, let's also do the outside so you can see all the same. Okay, so just some preliminary work to set it up. Here's the tendon. Here's the patella. This is the fibula. This is the tibia. This is a couple inches down would be the tuberosity of the tibia. The fibula is very straight, going down to the second third. Here, from the back view, the heel block can look like a box or a cylinder. So here's the design of the foot. I hadn't planned to go over the foot, but maybe I'll post a couple of videos that just give you the basics of it if anybody wants to learn it. And so first thing, let's design our calf. And I'm going to do the same thing as I did on this front view. I'm going to go through them as individual shapes so that you'll remember what they are. But again, when I draw it, you should follow the same process. Start with the biggest shape or your part. Position it so that it has a gesture relative to the beginning and end where it connects. And then lastly, make sure that you're working to get its perspective. Most of the perspective here I've done with overlaps. This is in front of this is in front of this, and the T overlap is what's helping me kind of set it up, which is fine. All right, so first is the soleus. Now if we look at that from the side, the leg looks kind of more like a sandwich. So the soleus goes here, goes from the fibula. Now you have to imagine this would be going diagonally kind of across the foot to the lower leg to the other side, and then ends right here. Over that is the gastrocnemius. So let's grab a color. That goes higher to the back of the knee. So it's grabbing onto the back of that bone. I'm showing that it's moving there with the overlap. It comes down. It sits a little bit higher than the soleus. And then this is what's going to create the tendon. Now, if the heel were lifted, I would just squash that shape, just like I did here. Now let's create our tendon. Tendon is going to be that sword, and it's going down to the heel. And another area you could look if you have a hard time seeing is usually the Achilles tendon is pretty noticeable. Sometimes there can be like a little shadow in the space of the tendon there. So that's done. So I would say in terms of our remembering an area, that this is still just one for me though. Because I could have, we could also just done our shape and then tendon. So that's one shape. The second shape that we're going to see from the side would be extensors. So that green one. So let's grab it. And let's move the same shape over. And so I'm kind of thinking, here, make an egg. The only thing I don't want to have happen, and why I'm showing this one at all, is you have to avoid anything that looks too buff for the lower leg, or else it's just going to look like it's broken. And we could fill that in. And then that becomes the tendon ramp, which is the third shape. And that's what's giving us this curved design. Since you're going to have to indicate the feet at least somehow this week, what I would do is just create triangles. If it's a profile, you can keep a triangle that's longer. If it's a front view, you can keep a triangle that's short, less wide. Sometimes I'll put a little notch where the big toe is. So it can be a really simple indication. But you want to have something there so you don't just have like people on legs without feet. And then this would be our tendon ramp. If you have a hard time getting the proportion, the general rule is that the height of the lower leg, so if we can find that height and just kind of take where the halfway would be. So from here, if you create a perfect box from there, that should lead you to the length of the foot. So there's also, later on a more developed picture of this would fill in more muscles by expanding on the extensor group. And I don't think that's something that you have to do, but one example of that would be that on the outside of your leg, you have a muscle called the Fibularis, and that sits right on top of the fibula. It would be part of your extensor group. This muscle looks like a really long, skinny 8. Just to give you an idea of the kinds of things you'd be finding in here if you were to break up the extensors. So long, skinny 8 with the same thing as the soleus or the calf muscle in terms of the design. It's layered, so the muscles are stacking. This top one's on the lower one, and then this creates a tendon that hooks under your ankle. So it hooks under there, and then that redirects it and shoots it to the middle of your foot. And that's what keeps your foot arched, is that this is almost always kind of in a constant tension. And without that arch, it's pretty uncomfortable for us. Other things that I want to look for here in terms of the asymmetry. So let's double check our big picture again. Maximus is high to the quadriceps, which are slightly lower. Quadriceps are high to the hamstring, which is slightly lower, to the knee, to the calf, to the extensors, right, all the way down. So that would be successful. But if I can say that I've got my part, the positions, the perspective, and it results in this overall uniform kind of feeling of rhythm and flow, it returns us back to our first week in terms of the designs that were really important to us. That is the most important kind of end result that we're looking for. So that's it. This week's a little bit easier, and it's a bit of a break in a sense because we start the arms next, which are way more intimidating and confusing. So if you have questions when you're looking at this, write them down. We can go over them at the Zoom Q&A, or if you want to fill in other views, maybe we'll leave that so that we can do that together in our Q&A session. But hopefully this makes sense. So the leg is a total upper leg, 3 shapes, hip, 3 shapes, lower leg, 3 shapes.